The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
We will begin in 1 minute. On behalf of the National University System, I would like to welcome you to our webinar series dedicated to building a bridge to online teaching. My name is Nancy Rohland Heinrich, and I serve as the Senior Vice President at National University. Today's session is the first of the High Five series designed for PK through 12th grade teachers transitioning from a traditional classroom to teaching in a virtual environment. Let me introduce our panelists. We have an esteemed group of panelists with more than 60 years experience in online education, subject matter experts, in not only online teaching, but online learning. We have Dr. Andy Shean, Chief Academic Officer for National Educational Partners, Dr. Colin Marlaire, Vice Provost, Northcentral University, Dr. Shannon McCarty, Vice President, Teaching and Learning for National University. And at this time, I would like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Steve Halfaker, retired superintendent and online professor. Steve?
Thank you very much, Nancy. I want to give a shout out to all the teachers this morning who are making this transition to the online space. I've had the opportunity to work with hundreds of you over the years in 5 or 6 different districts, and it's just truly been a pleasure to work with you. You really do make a difference every day, whether it's online or in the presence of your students. Just for the format for today, we have 5 questions for our presenters and total, and each question provides the foundation for a more in-depth exploration into the topic over the next 5 weeks, every Friday, by the way, at 11 a.m. If you have questions or comments, please write those in, and we hope to have some time to get to those at the end of the webinar. Let's get on to our first topic and our experts. The first topic deals with the breadth and scope of the transition. What are the beginning steps, and what were the big takeaways that you had with this big transition? Dr. Shean, we'll start with you this morning.
Thanks, Steve. And hey, everybody. Just like Steve said, so appreciate the great work you guys are doing in this tough time. You guys make a difference in people's lives every day, and students really count on you guys to be a source of inspiration. So it's an honor to be here with you today. So I remember when I first started getting into online teaching, I was working at a continuation high school, and I was a little bit scared, to be totally honest, to kind of tinker with technology. And my first activity was I was reading the book The Catcher in the Rye, and this is when social media was really booming. And I had this exercise where I had every one of my students choose a character from the book. So you're Phoebe, you're Holden, etc. And they had to create a Facebook page with that character. And then every day, based on the readings, they had to post how they felt. And I was very excited, a little bit nervous about it, and it actually took off. And it took off in a way that I couldn't control it, which kind of freaked me out. I didn't know if I was going to get a call from parents or if they were going to post inappropriate stuff. And so I just remember feeling very nervous and excited. And one of the big ahas for me was this notion of tinkering. I think a lot about learning the language of online learning or the language of technology, learning a second language. And so my aha is it takes time, tinker, and you can, do a bit of like you would learning a language where you can read about it, you can work on certain words, but there's nothing like really immersing yourself in the real environment and understanding that it takes time.
Thanks, Andy. Colin? Colin, we can't hear you. Let's jump to Shannon for right now, and then we'll come back to
Colin.
Sorry,
I got muted for a second there. Apologies for that. I was just going to say, in the last couple months, as this has all occurred, I've spoken with a lot of teachers, and actually have a personal experience, both because I have 3 young children that are all in elementary school right now, which is why I'm out on my porch. They're inside the home, and my wife is a high school teacher, and dealing with this transition. And I would just say 2 things. One is be calm, be a respite for yourself, for your students, and a steady voice in the noise. There are a lot of people saying a lot of things, and we're getting email communication from everybody, and everybody's speaking to everyone. But I think you all have the opportunity to be a steady and familiar voice for your students, and I think that's really important. And the other thing I just want to call out, and something that I think we're going to hit on, is the ask is significant. Many K-12 educators, educational technology and teaching remote have always been seen as, for most of you, as something kind of secondary or tertiary or a supplement to what you really do well, which is teach in the classroom. And yet, all of a sudden, in a brief moment, that's all changed. And so I would just say, let's just focus on kind of tactically, utilitarianly, what you can do to be successful today, tomorrow, next week, next month, and table thinking about the fall, table thinking about all of that, and know that it's not going to be perfect. Andy's notion of tinkering, that, you know, a lot of value is in your effort to connect and continue to work with your students in a difficult period.
Thank you, Shannon.
Yes, and I just want to echo what everybody else has said, but thank you. You guys are a lot of the front line, and I have a high school student who is actually doing some homework right in the other room, very close to me. So I really appreciate all the effort and work that you guys are putting in to make this successful transition for our kids, but only, you know, students across California. So thank you for that. And really, for me, I have to say, when I went my first time teach online, I realized that it was time consuming. And so I want you to know that it is real, that it does take time. It is a lot of a commitment. But I think, like Andy said and Colin mentioned, it's really just starting very simplistically, knowing that you can't be all things. And hopefully today will provide you some really key resources to make it a little bit less of a heavy lift. And then just to let you know that we are here for you. We're a great resource if you need us. So.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Did anyone want to share a particular aha moment when it kind of gelled or things made sense, or anyone have something to share in that vein? Okay, I will. I've been teaching online for, gosh, 10 years, and my biggest concern was that I wasn't going to be able to make a personal connection with students in the same way I did live in the classroom. And my aha moment was when I was able to see some humor and some connection back and forth between the student and I. And it was like, okay, we have a connection. This is fantastic. And actually, it became a richer connection because when we were sharing things, usually either in email or in the grading platform, I could share things with them individually and they could share back. So it became a very positive and joined experience. So that was my big aha moment. We're going to jump to our first question to our panelist, and that is Dr. Shean, who is an expert in connecting with students to the digital space. And Andy, would you please share how do you manifest yourself in the digital space to connect with the students?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I would just say, for me, I was one of those teachers who liked to kind of jump off the table and be sort of outrageous. Robin Williams from Dead Poets Society was like my hero, and I was really concerned that when I transitioned to online teaching, I would lose that sense of presence, that personal connection with students that I thought was an important part of who I was as an educator. So I spent a lot of time on it. And actually, I have just a quick story to kind of articulate a key strategy, which is when I went to the...
Don't you have some pictures there as well?
Yeah, actually, if we can, Rachel, if you can move to, there we go. Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Halfaker. Yeah, so let me explain these pictures through a quick story. So by the way, that is my real license picture, and that is how I feel all the time. So I was brought to the Poway Unified School District office to help lead online learning. And one of my first tasks was to look at our learning management system and see kind of which were the teachers that were getting a lot of action. And I was thinking, it's going to be this teacher who's doing like virtual simulations, or it's going to be like augmented reality. And I found out it was actually something pretty simple. They had a teacher who was doing, at the time, this was really popular, these LOL cats, all right? And so they would post in their online classroom this LOL cat of the day, and then underneath would be this homework assignment. And students would get really excited to just, log in and see, this teacher's LOL cat. And of course, while they're there, oh, this is the homework assignment. I got to read it. And that really struck me, transmitting yourself as a real human being into the online environment doesn't have to mean leveraging like next generation technology. It can be something as simple as a picture of your dog, a story about something that makes you real. I use the example of my license picture. I'm kind of a character, so I like to kind of represent that. But simple strategies, pictures, quotes, stories, anything that you can do to make that student on the other end feel like there's a real human in the classroom with them, because that's the beginning of that engagement and connection that we know is so critical to good learning.
Thank you, Dr. Shean. As a follow-up to that, I know you're also very much into the world of critical thinking and have spoken extensively on that. How does one inspire a student to be a curious, self-directed learner with a reflective lens in the online environment?
This is great. And I know there's probably teachers on here who are teaching elementary, you're teaching middle school, you're teaching high school. And so I would just ask you to think about how these strategies might apply to your specific areas. And we'll do more specific sessions down the road for you. But that's just it. It really starts with this notion of like, get curious. How do I get my students to get curious? And I had a professor in college, his name was Dr. Joel Levine. He was kind of one of my favorite teachers. He had kind of crazy hair and incongruously buttoned shirt, papers flying. I'm not sure he ever actually taught much of the syllabus, but he would ask you these thought-provoking questions that just got me thinking outside the classroom. And so to me, those was like made learning so wonderful, like wonder and curiosity, the things that we get so excited about as educators we want to instill in students. So how do you do that in the online environment? And there's lots of strategies, and actually the next session is going to be really dedicated to this. But just a key takeaway is ask great questions. Ask great questions, open-ended questions, thought-provoking questions, and questions that force students to really become, digitally searching for things. And I use this picture of Abraham Lincoln on purpose because the internet's a scary place for people who think it can't lie. Just because you pull up a question on Google, the first answer may not be right, which is scary, but it's also exciting. So how do you ask thought-provoking questions that cause students to search and then assess whether or not the answers have merit or not? And then equipping students with some understanding of how to assess what has merit or not. And I'll just give you one example. I used to do online discussion forums, and instead of asking questions like, what's a business unit of analysis, I'd ask things like, what luck for rulers that men don't think, said Adolf Hitler, react to that, right? And you can imagine the kind of discourse and curiosity and discussion that's going to go into something like that. So a long-winded answer, but if I could leave you with one thing, really foster that sense of curiosity, ask great thought-provoking questions, and really help students understand that the internet is an amazing place, but it's not always true what you find. And so how do you assess what has merit and what doesn't? And then to this picture below, which is a picture I took of when I walked into high-tech high school and was really inspired. Of all the things they could put on the wall, they said, ask why. So as a teacher in the online environment, of any environment really, always be asking why. Well, why did you think that? How did you find that out? And just keep, going and going with them.
Thank you, Andy. Very much appreciated. We look forward to seeing more of your presentation a week from today on Friday, May 1st. So looking forward to that. Thank you. Next up, we have Colin. Colin, thank you for your expertise and many years of study in this field. What are some basic best practices in instructional feedback and assessment that are timely, engaging, and interactive that will help our P12 educators?
Really thank you for that question, Steve. And if we could advance to that next slide. Perfect. So one of the things that I would talk about, and this really comes from years and years of experience in online, and that is you really need to focus on timely feedback and developing and making clear your expectation and your students' expectation for what your presence in that environment. And what I mean by that is moving to a digital internet-based environment. Students can come with a unrealistic expectation that's born from how they're exposed to online, which is a very visceral 24/7 kind of experience. And that isn't obviously sustainable for you. So making sure that they understand what they can expect from your presence from day 1 through day 21 in terms of this is when you can expect feedback from me on what kind of time frame. And I always say, if you don't provide them with an expectation, you're giving them free rein to imagine the most unrealistic expectation possible for what you should be doing with them. The other thing I would say is very much think in terms of an economy of scale. And that is, if you go in with a plan that you're going to engage with each of your students individually in the same robust manner that you do in the classroom, that is just not going to be sustainable. So you have to think of some economies of scale. Communicate with your classroom as a whole. Talk with them as a group. If there's key themes coming from the thoughts and mistakes that individual students are making, don't call that individual student out, but communicate that to the classroom, because you need to find those economies of scale. And then when you are engaging individually with students, really focusing on the most intentional communication and guidance that you can give them. And I think the other thing I would say is be very intentional and frankly frugal with the number of tools that you look at, and make a decision about what works well for you. So if you decide, I want to record my voice, I'm uncomfortable with camera, podcast, get comfortable with it, get them comfortable with it. And then also make sure that you are selecting technologies that it's realistic for you to ask your students to be able to access them. That means shortening video. If you're going to use audio, make sure it's in a format that they can use. If you use the LMS, make sure that they're accessing it. So ask some real questions about what you can produce that's sustainable, and make sure that what you produce is accessible for them.
Thank you, Colin. Colin, you mentioned some various tools. You talked about the podcast and the what works for different people, and to make sure that works. I think that was a great point. I'm just curious, what's your favorite? I mean, if you could just pick one and you're giving feedback to a class, what is your favorite?
That's a great question, Steve. And I would say I found, for my area of comfort, I got really comfortable with using PowerPoint with animation. And the reason for that is one of the things that I really struggled with online was trying to show students the sort of temporal experience of reading a passage and asking a question and working through that passage based on the adjustment I was trying to get them to make in that reading. And so I found that if I could record my voice over it and then just show an actual poem or text, and with some text box that just appear and disappear, start to show them that temporal progress. Now that worked for me, and it worked really well. It's not going to work for everyone, but for things that you want to show a work through of a process, you can do that with a formula in a math course. You can do that with a historical document. You can do that with all kinds of different things. And again, that's only one answer. We're going to have people that are more comfortable doing a riff over a student submittal with some annotation. We're going to find teachers that are more comfortable doing annotations in Word or in PDF, and that's great. The answer isn't that you're going to find one tool that works well for everybody. You're going to find what works well for you and focus on leveraging one or two of those. I would also just say I'm going to expand this conversation when we talk about just sort of the depth and breadth of tools that thankfully are available to you in this time, going through LMS, going through video content, going through document sharing options, and collaboration synchronous sessions, Zoom, Google Meets, and those types of things. So the good news is there's a lot available to you, but I'd also say that that makes a challenge in itself, because there's so much you're being exposed to, it can be a little overwhelming.
That's awesome. I hope you show that one. That sounds really like a nice feedback tool. You've got some other tools listed on your slide. Could you elaborate on a couple of those?
So I kind of broke it off into a couple different areas. So obviously most of you have some exposure to the LMS that's available to you in your school district. And I would definitely leverage that as much as possible, because that's a supported tool. And those are typically really good for some kind of check-in with your students, and then a collection and dissemination of materials on an ongoing basis. When it comes to things like handling media, things get a little bit more complicated. And I'll talk a little bit more at a later point in that next session. But YouTube is something that's available. There are some challenges. When you produce content for YouTube, there may be some barriers to getting it approved for view for your audiences, and that can be a barrier as well. And it's something that you'll want to consider. And then obviously, there's been a lot in the news about synchronous tools. So some districts are responding with supporting Zoom. Some districts are responding with Google Meets and others. I would definitely focus on whichever one is supported by your district, and making sure that you have a certain level of comfort, at least in terms of participant management and running a session in those mechanisms. One thing I can tell you, please do not run video through screened experience during those synchronous sessions. If there's one thing that's consistently creates the biggest challenges, is people that try to run something in parallel to that synchronous session as part of the experience. So running a Kahoots, or running a video that we're all watching collectively at the same time, it just creates a lot of challenges and errors.
Thank you, Colin. Wow, that sounds exciting. Colin's presentation is on May 8th, and I am really excited about that. All right, our next presenter is Shannon. And Shannon, you are an expert in the sciences, and we appreciate that. So Shannon, what about STEAM courses? How can we support students in these hands-on approaches in a virtual learning setting?
Thank you, Steve. So let me first start by saying that I started my career as a high school chemistry teacher, so all my science nerds. So I am really passionate about teaching science, and I'm really going to try and focus my responses on the larger discipline of STEAM or STEM. But if science slips out, it's only because that's usually what I'm really excited to talk about. But all of these tips and ideas will definitely apply to the larger STEAM discipline. So when you start teaching online, taking what you usually do inside the classroom and then is automatically converting that to online space is not always the most effective. It can be challenging for students because they may not know all the information that they need to proceed with that lesson. So what I've always tried to do is really anticipate the information, directions, resources that they're going to need to complete a lesson. So anything you can do to make it simple, and when possible, if you can chunk the material, those are always great ideas. If you could do bite-sized videos, try to stick to less than 7 minutes if you're providing instructions. And if you need longer, it might not be the best lesson or lab experiment to do online. So just some suggestions as you start picking through and choosing your materials. So now the fun part. When you start thinking about what made you passionate about your field, specifically in STEM, I'm gonna guess it probably had a lot to do with discovery. And when I think about like what made me fall in love with science, it was probably my science projects that we got to do. So think about what opportunities you can create within your lessons and in your labs that allows students to discover. So think little mini virtual science fairs. And then this is your opportunity to ignite that passion in your students. You do not have to be the technical guru, and you do not have to design every lesson to a T. You can really think about just some open inquiry methods. You provide a great question. You provide some clear guidelines on how the student should be discovering. And then you can allow the students, either point them in the directions of resources or let them use that magical Google tool and do a lot of searches for themselves. There are so many great videos out there, online simulations, and even virtual games. They're going to speak to your students and draw them in. So when you're starting to teach those really abstract science or STEM topics, you can really help with those great visuals that are available to your students out there right on the web.
Thank you, Shannon. Shannon, are there any particular tools, or what are your favorite tools? Or if the teacher's getting started, what do you recommend where they start with the tools question?
Yes, absolutely. And I think if we advance the slide, I have some resources on the following slide as well. And I'll kind of talk high level, but there are lots of good tools out there. So one of the things that I do recommend is open educational resources. So I'm sure you guys have all probably done some searches looking at SET, Khan Academy, PBS, National Geographic, even NASA. They have amazing free resources available to you. Lots of great simulations, lots of great videos. We Are Teachers and Region 13 are also another great area. And a lot of times we think about these are more geared towards maybe middle school to high school, but honestly, there's really great resources and fun activities for any grade level. And one thing you can do is always help to modify. If there's something that you might think is a great resource, but maybe the questions are a little higher level, you can always make modifications and just tell your students what to look for in those sites and those simulations to kind of walk them through. So those are if you're doing some asynchronous, and you can always leverage that during a synchronous session if you want to model something or show something and pull that in and kind of talk it through with your students as well. So lots of good things with online. I always think about, you can even create group functions if you'd like to have some of those projects. So leveraging your LMS, it may have a group functionality, or even Google Apps, Google Hangouts. You can create those group projects, allow students to really interact with those tools and work through those projects together. Another chance, I would always encourage students, if they are completing any labs or doing projects, encourage them to do screen captures if it's a simulation, to use video to capture any maybe experiments that they might be doing. And then selfies are always good, right? Because they could take a picture of what they accomplished or what they did if they were using manipulatives. So you can really still see that those things are occurring, even more in an asynchronous setting. So great opportunities for your STEM students. And then I would also encourage, one of the things that we may not always consider, students, they kind of are a captured audience at the moment, but they still have their amazing kitchen that they can do some really cool science labs. Even around the house, there might be some ideas or things that they've really questioned or wondered about. And so you can take those opportunities to start helping students discover. So don't be afraid to modify some experiments with some things that they could do right in your own kitchen or their own kitchen.
There we go. Thank you, Shannon. That is very exciting, and we're looking forward to your full workshop on STEM and STEAM. And that is going to be on May 15th. That's very exciting, 11 a.m., same time, same station. Yeah. All right. We have another topic, which is basically where is online headed into the future? And I'm going to ask Dr. Shean if he would share just a couple of comments on what we can expect from topic number 5, which is workshop number 5. Dr. Shean?
All right, thank you. Can you hear me, Steve?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, so first of all, Shannon, that was fabulous. And there is no way that my wife is letting my kids do a science experiment in our kitchen, but it would be a lot of fun to watch that. So, actually kind of building off of what Shannon shared, this idea of like really hands-on projects, I really feel like that demonstration of learning, that applied learning, that's really where I think you get students to go deep in their engagement and deep in their learning. And so when I think about the future of online learning, it's easy to get caught up like in the hype, like it's going to be a hologram or it's going to be, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that I think is essential is tie it back to what we know about great learning. And so in this session that's actually going to be coming up is going to focus on what we call situated authentic learning. And if you're a learning theory geek like I am, that might ring the name of Seymour Papert, who's a wonderful philosopher, learning theorist who talks a lot about situated, authentic, applied learning. And that might sound a little nerdy. So what's that mean? I always think of the idea of like learning how to like fix a car, which by the way, I'm really not a very mechanical savvy kind of guy, but my wife really wanted me to be able to like do some basic stuff with a car. So I really tried to teach myself, and I went kind of read about it. I looked online for some videos. I talked to like a friend who's a really good mechanic, and yet I still don't think I could have really fixed anything that had to do with a car. And so what I really needed to do was I needed to situate myself into a real life experience, right, where I was actually in front of a car and try to actually fix something. And in that fixing, have a cognitive apprenticeship kind of role where somebody who was very savvy at fixing cars was next to me, giving me feedback. Hey, why are you doing that? Think about this differently. How does that work? Or why would you go there? Or et cetera. And that kind of personalization, situated applied learning, I think is where you really learn how to do the thing that you need to do in real life. And so, okay, what's that have to do with the future of online learning? If you connect that to what I believe is going to become more and more prominent in the field is things like virtual reality and immersive learning, right? Where we're going to be able to port ourselves into these really rich environments where we're going to be able to apply what we're trying to do in more of a real life setting without actually having to be in that real setting. And by no means does that mean that you still shouldn't actually try to literally fix the car. But what if you could simulate yourself into that environment without having to tinker with the car, maybe break some stuff or whatever? I feel like that's where a key part of this future vision for online learning, I think that's maybe one of the holy grails of online learning. So I get really excited about situated applied learning connected to things like immersive reality, virtual reality, et cetera. And so we're going to have a phenomenal speaker. His name's Dr. Michael Kolagi. He's a real expert in the space, PhD from Pepperdine in Learning Sciences, and I think you're all going to get a big kick out of his session. So a lot more to do with that. But I would just say the key, I think, to think about a topic that might be a little bit further out is ground yourself in just, like Colin said, like just figuring out the day. But no, there's some really exciting stuff on the horizon too that hopefully you can be inspired about what's coming down the pipe.
Thank you, Andy. That workshop is May 22nd, by the way. Well, this is great. We have a couple of questions coming in, and we have some time for those. If I could get the presenters to turn your cameras back on and your microphones. One of the questions has to do with establishing a network. Like, how did you go about building the capacity and the framework and the network to get the resources and get the training and things that you needed? And now just take anybody who wants to jump in there. Andy, you want to jump in there?
Let me jump in there and then I'll hand it over to the others. But this is such a good question. And, I feel like when I first started teaching in high school English, I really, I felt I learned a lot in school, but it wasn't until I had like mentors and people I could talk to at my school and other, educators that I feel like I really learned how to teach. The same is true of online learning. So the question of how do you develop a network, it's critical. People to vent to, people to laugh with, people to get ideas from, it's key. So there's a lot out there, both in the K-12 space and the higher ed. So I'll just mention two, and then I'm curious to hear what Shannon and Colin said. So first of all, iMakeHal is a really great K-12 resource. If you just Google it, you can pick it up on the Google. It's an environment in which you have people all over the country who are really well versed and connected in online learning. They have standards, they have resources, they have hopefully when the COVID restrictions lift, they'll have backup in conferences again. That's a great place to meet folks. The second is, honestly, I think at your universities. I know, for example, if you're an alumni of National University, you have people who are teaching now in the online space. You probably have people who teach adjunct for National in the online space, who I think are probably people that you could reach out to through various networks and get connected to, who I think, given this period of time or just in general, would be excited to spend time with you and connect with you and share tips and just be a source of support for you. So yeah, like your university alumni, and I think, you know, really established consortiums like iNACAL, I think, are two key strategies that I would start forming a network.
Thank you, Andy. And that's andyshean.com, by the way. Shannon, what's your favorite network?
Well, I personally love Online Learning Consortium. Usually is the network that I go to for a lot of resources. I was thinking about listservs. That would be a great option for a lot of our instructors out there. Personally, Edutopia, one place that I go to a lot. I know that they have some kind of general forums where people can post and answer questions. So lots of opportunities for interactions with your peers.
Great. Colin?
I would just say, in addition to all those, one thing I would call out that I think is really important is don't forget the network of your peers at your district and at your institution. It's probably a really good idea to share notes with each other, you know, have an ongoing discussion. What tools are people using? What's working? What's not working? What you're going to find is you can hear sort of some best practices and, by correlation, worst practices. Just basically hearing what didn't work with one of your colleagues working with something with their students. So I would really think about leveraging the community of your local practitioners and educators, right, to increase that study of what's working and what's not, and really listen to each other. There's a great opportunity to help, and if you become expert in something, share that knowledge. Please share something that works that can be really powerful and a value add.
Thank you, Colin. I know Nancy's going to share some resources from the university setting, but I want to jump to Colin. I think you had a question earlier that you were going to respond to. It had to do with second grade curriculum, maybe?
Yeah, and actually that came from our participants. And please, audience, do post questions. What we don't answer here in the session, we'll certainly take those on and try and answer those in a later session. But the question was really what to do with second graders. And I think this is from a teacher, and struggling to get them engaged and focused while online. And I wish I had a perfect answer to that, and this would be a great thing for us to follow up on. I can give you a couple things that may potentially help. One is, at that age group, I would definitely say, and it pains me to say this because I am one of those parents that's going to be then tasked with the work, but you have to leverage the parents that are in the household to help you with those students. Second grade is a difficult level to try and get them to connect in an entirely new context with their teacher. So, you know, you really do need to, unfortunately, task the parents to help in that process. The other thing I would say is really try and get them to connect this context with other contexts with which they're much more familiar. When you engage with them in the physical classroom, they get a sense of the educational experience. Now you're trying to connect with them in their external environment, right? And so invoking some of that external environment and trying to make connections to it is probably a good approach. And that is, get them to do book reports on books that they're reading, get them to do presentations about something in science that they're really excited about. You know, I have a son who's, I don't know why, but is very into poisonous creatures. So getting him to do a science presentation about poisonous creatures is some way to get his personal passion and connect it to something that he's probably less comfortable with, which is presenting on that in this entirely new context. So get him someplace to start with that's a little bit more comfortable. And I would just call out to our participants, if you're thinking of other things out there that are great answers to what that question was, send it our way, and we can certainly disseminate that as part of this experience.
Thank you, Colin. Colin, I'm reminded of some work we did early on with students posting presentations on Schoology where they could, just what you said, where they could see all the other class members' presentation on the web. They could click on it and watch the entire presentation, and then they could watch everybody in the class's presentation and over again if they wanted, and show obviously their parents and others. So that's a great strategy. Kids love to make videos as well. All right, Rachel, thank you for manning our questions. Is there anything else that popped up on the board?
Oh, yes. So there are so many questions that have come in, and unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all of them, but I have recorded a bunch of them. So here's a question. I work in a low-income school where a lot of parents don't have access to internet and struggle with technology in the classroom because they are not used to Google Classroom. As a staff, we were coming up with ways to help parents who are struggling with connecting to the internet and being behind. What are some strategies you recommend for this?
Anyone?
Hey, Steve,
We'll start with Colin and then jump to Andy. Go ahead, Colin.
I was just going to say, we have to be very conscious of that. One of the greatest concerns about sort of this move to virtual is the uneven access that's going to necessarily be created as part of this. The one thing I would say is think in terms of packaging up whatever teaching or educational experience you're doing, so that if somebody's able to attend a session, great. But if they're not able to attend a session, thinking about packaging up what you discussed at that time and giving it to them in an asynchronous, offline way so that they are able to finally connect and do that work offline and then bring that back to you. And that's a really important thing. And Andy, go ahead.
No, I think that's right on. I would say two things. So, being a kid who came from poverty, we didn't have at our house some of the things that other kids have. And so I just want to say my heart goes out to those kids and families, but to you teachers, thank you so much for being here and for looking for strategies to help them. It's just so important. So thank you. And hits home for me. I just hope our chancellor of the National University System is serving on a group with the governor who's really looking to partner with Google and other philanthropic efforts to provide more access to digital devices for students all over the state of California. So it's something that's near and dear to our heart. I think what Colin said is right on. So for example, we work with a lot of students at our various universities who are in the military, who sometimes are deployed and at bases in which there's not great internet access. So this idea of being able to take resources where, obviously the ideal is you would be able to deliver it with online as the medium, but if that's not an option, think about how you would repurpose it and perhaps send it in another way that doesn't necessarily require that kind of bandwidth, and figure out strategies and how that still can be a meaningful learning experience, even though they may not have like an individual computer for every kid.
Rachel, I think we have time for one more question.
Awesome. I think this is a good question. Any suggestions for adults who are not comfortable with face-to-face or audio with online teaching?
Since that's actually tied with what I'll actually be discussing on the next session, I think it's on the 8th, after Andy's. You don't have to be. That is the good news, right? I think it's really important to know what you are going to be most successful and best at. If you find that you're one of those people, and I think Andy's a perfect example of one, that's very good at the sort of personal presentation. It's a very important part, and there are a lot of teachers that are like that are most energetic and most impactful in those. Yes, go do video. Go figure out how to do it, figure out a way to do it well, and get comfortable with it. If it's foreign to you or alien to you, the good news is that's not the only way you can do things. There's a lot of other ways. We talked about animating over PowerPoint. We talked about podcasts. We talked about heavily investing in a more formal textual response through annotating on documents and things like that. Find a way that you can be successful, because that's the best that you can do for your students.
Thank you, Colin. I think we're going to need to wrap there, but we will take, as Colin mentioned, we'll take all these questions and give them to our presenters for the next 4 weeks when we go into more depth in each area. So thank you very much for that. I want to thank the panel so much, and I learn something every time I'm with you. And I also want to thank again all of the teachers who are making this jump to the online platform. It's hard work, as Shannon said. It's just plain hard work. Thank you for that. All right, I'll turn it back to Nancy.
Hi, thank you, Steve, and thank you to all our esteemed panelists for your insight and expertise on online teaching. And Rachel, if we could have the last slide. First of all, I would like to share with you that we have many resources that you'll be able to use. And one, we have posted online a great array of resources on online teaching for P12 educators. We do, as mentioned, have our upcoming webinars. So the next 4 Fridays at 11 o'clock, please join us. So we will have Andy Shean next week with creating a digital presence, which he mentioned today. The following week, on the 8th, we will have Dr. Colin Marlaire on teaching through engagement in the virtual classroom. And I know that that's something that a lot of you may be struggling with. On May 15th, we'll have the practical application for teaching STEAM for a virtual classroom with Shannon McCarty. And as Andy had mentioned earlier, our final session will be the future of virtual education on what's next. Additionally, if there's a high demand, as we've seen, for additional sessions, we'll look to potentially add more. But we also want to mention the wonderful programs that we're bringing to the K-12, not only teachers, but families and students. Our Stanford programs have brought Inspire at Home. You've got the website there, and that is for all families to have access to special tools for social emotional learning. Also Inspire at Home, which is directed for our P12 teachers. So please take advantage of those resources available. And then also for those of you in California, our National University Virtual High School is offering up to 3 free courses for high school students, and the university is offering 3 free courses for students who have been impacted from other colleges in the COVID-19. So thank you all for taking the time out of your busy calendars and investing in yourself in this professional development opportunity, participating in the webinar. And we truly hope that these webinars will help you as well as your students acclimate to your new virtual environment.